Thank you, Chantika. Okay, so as I said at the beginning of the evening, we are dedicating these Sangha nights in June to explore themes that are relevant to Buddhist Action Month, particularly to the theme of Buddhist Action Month. Thank you, Zach. Which is compassion and connection in times of crisis. So those of you here at the center, if you haven't grabbed yet one of these printouts with the program for the month, you can grab it downstairs in the desk. And I believe there is a PDF that has been circulating online. I think it's been sent via email. I don't know if Chantika maybe can do that later on during the rest of the evening. Put it in the chat for those of you online, though it's a very small group online, so you probably have that already. And last week, we started, as I say earlier, looking at the whole area of race, which is a very relevant topic in our work. So tonight, and this is her inspiration, Catherine is going to be talking. The title for the talk is Internationality as a Practice, Responding to Global Conflict. And this is as I say, Catherine's inspiration in relation to the world that we live in, isn't it? We are constantly bombarded by these images, this knowledge that there are countries at war, there is a population suffering because of violence perpetrated by states, by nations against each others. I just want to say, just before Catherine starts, I'm very, very happy that Catherine is brave tonight to do a talk. I really enjoy working with Catherine. We have collaborated before organizing Sangha nights, and we did just one Sangha night before. So this is quite. It's a much bigger project. Organizing a whole month of evenings, and Catherine has been so dedicated and committed, to this, to each of the Sangha nights that we are showcasing this month. There's something of Catherine in it, and also something that I equal as well with that sort of a courageous spirit in Catherine is that she is not afraid of expressing doubts, expressing just showing insecurities, maybe a sense of not being sure about something, but always with a bit of an edge, sort of the diamond cutting through edge that I really enjoy. So I really, really rejoice in Catherine's, and that she decided to stay home tonight, and she's going to be giving the talk from home. So it's a bit more sustainable for her, and I respect that as well. So I think that's enough of an introduction for you, Catherine. Over to you, sister.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah, forgive me for not being there in person, but it feels quite overwhelming sometimes for me to do talks in person. I'm working on it, but in the meantime, thanks for accommodating me. Before I start talking, I'd like to invite you to close your eyes for a moment and just to draw attention to your heart center. Just breathing into your heart center. And if you can, just having a sense of the final stage of the Metta Bhavana. So this is the stage where we generate a feeling of loving kindness for everybody in the world. So you might all have different ways of doing this. So I personally sort of see planet Earth in my mind. For some of you, it might just be a feeling. But yeah, if we can spend about a minute just holding the world in that feeling of loving kindness. And if we could open our eyes now. So yeah, tonight's topic is internationality as a practice, responding to global conflict. So I think we're all aware of the conflict in Ukraine, but not forgetting that it isn't the only conflict happening in the world, nor is it the first, and nor will it be the last. And yeah, so today's talk is really about how we respond and approach the subject of conflict as Buddhists. And so, yeah, the theme of Buddhist Action Month rather is compassion and connection in times of crisis. And I was just reflecting that compassion and connection are sort of the opposites of conflict in a way, the remedies, if you like. So yeah, I'm going to look into that a little bit more deeply this evening. But before we do that, I think it's also worth pausing to reflect on the possibility that our conditioning as a British society might mean that we might give more space in our minds to conflicts happening in Europe rather than conflicts happening further afield. And there's no sort of malice or ill will in that. It's just the conditioning of familiarity. It perhaps feels like it hits harder if it's closer to home. But I do think it's worth being curious about that sort of subtle ranking in our mind of which conflicts, affect us more emotionally as opposed to ones that we don't know as much about or that are further afield, and why we sort of, subconsciously frame things like that as individuals and a society. So, I want to first draw inspiration for this talk from, it's actually an extract from a seminar, excuse me, that Subhuti delivered back in the 90s, I think. The seminar was called Breaking Out Britain. And he introduced this idea of internationality as a practice. Yeah, so internationality, the idea of a global community, one that, transcends boundaries. And Subhuti talks about how ever since the very early inception of Triratna, Sangharakshita had a clear vision that he wanted it to be an international order. Yeah, he didn't just want to stay in Britain. He had the vision that it should be, international and spread beyond our borders. And Subhuti reflected that this was for three main reasons, which I'm going to briefly touch on. So firstly, the Bodhisattva Principle, that the three jewels are not just for us in Britain, but they're an ideal for all humans, all humanity. The second reason he wanted to break out of Britain was, it's pragmatic and self-preserving in a way. It's much easier for us to be Buddhists when for our practice to be supported if we have a network of global Buddhists around the world to support us. And the third reason that internationality is a spiritual practice. So because having, an international Sangha, it touches new depths, reaches new heights. It brings us together as a global fellowship. And Subhuti sees that sing has a direct spiritual effect on us individually and collectively. So yeah, this sense of internationality has been at Triratna's heart since the 60s, basically. And before I go on to talk about how that can be applied outside of Triratna, I want to explore something else Subhuti says about internationality and why it's so impactful. So Subhuti reflected on times that he spent in India and how he would notice that sometimes Westerners would have a very strong response to being in India. And he put that down to the sheer difference in our conditioning. So right down from how we sleep, how we eat, all the way up to things like, you know, the cultural and religious fabric of the country. And so, yeah, when we meet people who have different conditioning from ours, we sort of see our own conditioned nature more clearly. But not only do we see it more clearly, it gives us an opportunity to transcend it as well. Because when we get together with someone with different conditioning, quote, we have to meet at a deeper level, beyond the incomprehensions and incompatibilities that our different backgrounds might throw up. So yeah, we almost have to find common ground in a way. It almost pushes us to meet at a deeper level, to go beyond the surface layers, I suppose, of conditioning, to get to the deepest parts of us that are essentially the same or similar. And yeah, so reading that seminar got me reflecting on a few things that, yeah, while this idea of connecting on this deep level can apply to people from different countries, it could be applied to anybody really who has different conditioning from our own. Yeah, and meeting them on this deeper spiritual level can help us to transcend that. So yeah, it's about communication, compassion, connection. And so I don't think it's a leap to say that this spirit of internationality can be used when approaching the subject of conflict, whether that's a conflict on a global level or more sort of close to home in our family or at work. So yeah, so how can we nurture this compassion, this connection in our lives during times of conflict? So my mind immediately turned to Thich Nhat Hanh, who actually died early this year. And for those of you who don't know, he was a Vietnamese Buddhist monk who advocated for peace during the Vietnam War. And for that was basically labelled a communist, an anti-war poet, and was eventually exiled from his home country of Vietnam for his peace work. But before he was exiled, he decided that he wanted to take his monks and nuns off the mat, so to speak, and get them doing things, get them engaged with peaceful, non-violent work. So yeah, Thich Nhat Hanh set up a few organisations based on this principle of non-violence and compassion, and they would do things like aid war-torn villages, establish medical centres, rebuild schools. And Thich Nhat Hanh himself also extensively travelled to the USA to give lectures promoting peace. And like I said, he was eventually exiled for this work, but still stands by it, and you know, up until his death, gave lots of talks on conflict and peace. So he's been credited really as being one of the founders of the idea of engaged Buddhism. So that's sort of a social movement really of Buddhists. It's approaching the idea of applying Buddhist ethics, teachings and practices to modern day social situations, basically. So it's the idea that as Buddhists we can act as long as it's done, I would argue, in accordance with the precepts. So we can all give time, energy, funds, as much as is feasible for us. And we may be moved to support different causes to each other, whether that's the climate change crisis or helping with peace causes, whatever we're moved to do. But as long as we have the precepts at our core and do everything with a mindful, compassionate awareness, we can engage with the world, and you know, we don't just have to stay on the mat. And Thich Nhat Hanh actually created precepts for engaged Buddhism. I'm not going to read them out because there's 14 of them. I think there's quite a few. But they cover such themes as, being open to others' viewpoints, not assuming that your knowledge is correct, not avoiding seeing suffering in the world, and practicing right speech and other precepts. And following on from that, I've always been quite moved by the way that Thich Nhat Hanh talks about conflict and talks about compassion and communication, especially in relation to war. And so I want to share some insights that move me from some talks he's done. So one of the instructions that he gives, communicates to us, is that before approaching conflict, we also have to take care of ourselves and our own emotions. So he acknowledges that it's very easy to become overwhelmed by suffering, especially times of conflict, with feelings of fear, anger, despair. And he says that we really need to sort of counterbalance that with peace and joy as well, and not neglect those positive emotions as well. So he uses a great analogy that within all of us, there are seeds of different emotions. So, anger, violence, sadness, fear, but also peace, joy, compassion. And I took that to mean that, we can choose which ones we water and, nurture. And through the energy of mindfulness to counterbalance the negative feelings in times of war and conflict, we can touch these seeds of joy and peace within us. And he used a great example of, he would breathe in, and with mindful awareness, he'd mindfully consider his eyes. And when he considered his eyes with mindfulness, he realized how wonderful it was to have eyes that worked and that were in good condition. And he got it was a source of joy for him to consider that, and something as simple as that. So I think if we bring that gratitude and mindfulness to everyday simplicity, we can nurture peace and joy within us, and that helps us see more clearly, act more skillfully in response to conflict. And a lot of Zen poets are good at expressing the joy and beauty of very simple everyday things. It reminded me of a poem by Ryokan, I want to say his name is Ryokan, who was a Buddhist monk and hermit. And he wrote a poem about a wooden bowl called My Cracked Wooden Bowl, which I'm going to read. This treasure was discovered in a bamboo thicket. I washed the bowl in a spring and then mended it. After morning meditation, I take my gruel in it. At night, it serves me soup or rice, cracked, worn, weather-beaten and misshapen, but still of noble stock. So Ryokan, he's found beauty, peace, joy from something very ordinary. And I kind of want to be like that myself. I think it's comforting to me to know that that's always available, that there's beauty in everything, even if in the most simple things. And Thich Nhat Hanh also goes on to say that as well as nurturing these positive emotions, we have to take care of our negative emotions, like embracing them, like a baby almost, and taking care of them. And I think from sort of reflecting on Thich Nhat Hanh's talks, I think it's not beating ourselves up. I think it's about recognizing our human emotions, not berating ourselves for not being filled with love and compassion in times of war, like we feel like we should as Buddhists. Rather, it's sort of noticing and embracing whatever we do feel, but also recognizing our ability to transform those emotions and respond more creatively with time and work. So it's just recognizing that potential. I think there's always potential there. And I think, the Metta Bhavana, the first stage in particular, can help us with that awareness and kindness for ourselves and whatever we're feeling in response to things like this. And when we work on that, we can perhaps respond more skillfully to difficult emotions brought on by times of conflict. And then Thich Nhat Hanh said something that I find quite admirable. So, as we know, millions of people were killed in the Vietnamese War, but Thich Nhat Hanh said he didn't hate the Americans. He only viewed the American soldiers with compassion, because he recognized that they too were a victim of policy, and that this policy had been born out of, wrong views, really, and fear. And he recognized, and this is not easy to do, but he recognized that the people who made those policies who were carrying out these acts, they were also suffering, because a person who is free from suffering wouldn't want anybody else to suffer. So yeah, he basically went on to say that it's not the people that who are the enemy, it's the fear, it's the hatred and the discrimination. And I think that's quite moving, because it's not always easy to think like that in those sorts of situations. So he's still being an engaged Buddhist, he's still being an anti-war activist, while also recognizing the suffering and humanity of both sides and holding that with compassion. And I think the Dalai Lama said similar things as well with regards to the Chinese when he was exiled as well. So yeah, it got me reflecting that this attitude, it waters the seeds of compassion, seeds of peace within us, and helps us act as engaged Buddhists in skillful ways. And with this compassion at our hearts, Thich Nhat Hanh also stresses the importance of communication that's important in any conflict situation, whether that's at home, with our friends, with someone at work, on a global level. And he uses the phrase deep listening, which basically means to listen with compassion, even if you don't agree, even if you feel like what the other person's saying is full of wrong views, wrong perceptions. You still listen deeply with compassion and connect on that deeper level. And this attitude reminded me of a quote from the Dhammapada, which I'll just read. Him I call indeed a Brahmana, who is tolerant with the intolerant, mild with the violent, and free from greed among the greedy. So, yeah, I find Thich Nhat Hanh's approach to war and conflict very admirable, very inspiring, because he's essentially recognizing the humanity of everyone, that the deepest parts of every human can connect with the deepest parts of every other human, like Subhuti also reflected on in his seminar, this sense of internationality. And yeah, and that made me think a little bit about non-duality, going a bit deeper now. But yeah, the sense of non-duality, so the idea that any sort of distinction between ourselves and other people is sort of constructs of the mind, basically. There's a lot you can say about non-duality, but I think in this context, yeah, it's recognizing that internationality again, that sense of we really all are one consciousness, we're all suffering, we're all a little bit deluded. And once we realize that, yeah, we can start to respond more skillfully, communicate more skillfully, and take action more skillfully. So yeah, there's a lot of information and theory there. So I just want to end really by summarizing the talk in some practical takeaways. So what can we actually do to face conflict in our lives and in the world, and the emotions as well that brings up? So the first thing is, nurturing these seeds of compassion, seeds of joy through gratitude. Maybe we want to keep a gratitude journal, but also by honing that energy of mindfulness in our lives as well. Because when we do that, we'll naturally start to see, the joy in more simple things. And then the second thing is, reflecting on this idea of internationality and recognizing that even though we're all very different with different conditioning, we can connect on a deeper level through deep listening. And then the third tip is to take practical steps in times of conflict, as much as our time and our funds allow. yeah, so if we're able, writing letters to MPs, engaging in peaceful, non-violent protests, engaging in dialogue about conflicts, which is what we'll do a little bit of in a bit, donating money, volunteering for peace causes, educating ourselves and others. So yeah, we can take action if we're moved to, even in small ways, but as long as we do it, yeah, I think in accordance with the precepts. And the fourth thing that I think we can do is, practicing the metta bhavana and cultivating the seed of compassion, which will guide us through conflicts, small and large. And I think the metta bhavana, we're trying to sort of hold ourselves, our friends and enemies, all with the same level, I suppose, of loving kindness. So I think that's a great practice for this sort of challenging subject. And my fifth and final tip is, if you're not familiar with Thich Nhat Hanh, there's a load of talks on YouTube, and he's written a lot of books as well. And I really, really like him because he's got a way of explaining things that's very clear, very simple, but still very inspiring and moving at the same time. So anything that he's done, and he's done quite a lot of talks as well, which you can find on YouTube on the subject of conflict. So I'll finish the talk by saying that in groups it's an open space really to talk about anything you want with regards to this, but perhaps maybe about conflicts going on in the world or your life, what your response has been to them in the past, maybe how you'd like to work with them in the future, and just anything else that came out of this talk and your feelings about internationality. And so I'm going to finish the talk with a quote from the Dhammapada that I think sums up the theme quite nicely. For hatred does not cease by hatred at any time. Hatred ceases by love. This is an old rule. The world does not know that we must all come to an end here, but those who know it, their quarrels cease at once. Thank you. I think you're on mute in there.
Can't hear you from the shrine room.
Hello? Okay, good. Okay, I was saying that what very interesting ideas there, Catherine, and thank you very much for putting all that together and suggesting those reflections as well. Very practical suggestions as well. So we have about half an hour for groups. It's very generous time for us to dwell into these topics. So I suppose the people online can be in a single group. And if we come back around 9:28, so just to round the evening up, and then us here in the shrine room, maybe a group of you stay here with me in the shrine room, and another, so half of the room goes downstairs with Para, and that's how many we are. Shall we do a quick 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Okay? 1. So the ones stay with me and the 2s go with Para.